Zen 5 has been getting some hate, and I've been trying to stay positive with it, but I just think it's not going to get any better with time, which might have been a little contrary to my last video. But I haven't been able to put anything out in a while. I've been busy with real work, but I've always stayed passionate, and I've been playing around with the new Zen 5 processors and trying to find the outer limits of them, trying to see like, hey, there's got to be a bright side to this scenario. And if you watched my video originally on the 9600, I had some takeaways and I've had some time to test some more stuff since then. And I'm going to give you kind of like my additional findings. And this video is basically going to be all right, I've been living with Zen 5 for about a month now. Where do we stand now? Because there's not a whole lot of people talking about these processors because not a whole lot of people are buying them. And kind of my sidebar is that the tech gaming PC industry has been in such a low point, just like sluggish position. I mean, nothing has been exciting for a long time. It's been like bad launch after bad launch, Intel frying computers, CPUs, video cards coming out just costing your right arm. Everything's been kind of bad news. So it's like everybody was looking for Zen 5 to be this huge, exciting thing. And it's kind of like just now I'm just waiting for Intel to come out and see what they're going to do, which, hopefully it's great. But in order to avoid just rambling, this is gonna be a little bit of a lower production video because, like I said, I've been real busy at work, but I kind of wanted to get my impressions out now that I've been working with these for a little bit. So I've gone ahead and over there put up what I want to talk about, and some of this stuff's gonna be quick, and then some of it's gonna be a little longer. So if you're worried, because I've seen different people say all sorts of wild things, if you're worried about updating BIOS, ease of use, and is this processor even gonna work? There's always, I guess, the off chance, but I'll just get this one out of the way. I have the 9600X and I have the 9950X, and I installed both those processors two different ways. The 9600X, I had a previous gen processor in there. I updated the BIOS via, just the whatever brand it was. I think that was a ASRock board. So they're like Q BIOS update or whatever it's called. Insert the thumb drive, did it from the computer, updated. Then I went ahead and threw the new processor in there, ran perfect right out of the gate. My other PC, I was using an MSI X670E board that I had ARM-made and gotten back, and I didn't have the previous processor because I had already reused it. So on that one, I just threw the 9950X in there, and of course it wouldn't boot right off the get-go because the BIOS weren't updated. I threw a thumb drive in there and did the flashback just with the physical button on the back, and sure enough, 5 minutes later, thing was up and running and going great. So I would put that to ease. I don't think you're gonna have huge problems with that. There's always the one-off, but I'm 2 for 2, which isn't a great data point, but it just doesn't seem to be that big of a problem. Especially there's already been several updates now that it's been released. I'm sure they're running pretty stable. The second one is I don't have a ton of data put together. This isn't like my normal benchmark videos. I don't have a bunch of footage to show you like, oh, holy cow. I have taken some footage on the 9600X, and my goal is to get more put together so I can do another compare video with, like maybe my 7500F, 96, my 7800X 3D, and now the 9950X. That would be an awesome video, but those take a considerable amount of time to put together, so that's probably a little bit further down the road still. But performance, you can pretty much look it up across the board. They're like 5% faster, which is not really exciting. And then we get into the next point, which is energy efficiency. And I think right out the gate, everyone was like, oh my God, they're so energy efficient. And I think that was like one of my big takeaways was like how energy efficient it is. AMD in particular has like a very narrow band where it performs very well for the energy used as long as you stay inside of that. But if you're like me and you're just always seeking the best and you're overclocking and you do all this stuff, you exit that band very quickly. So the more I've looked at, these processors, both of them, the 96 and the 9950X, by the time I'm done doing PBO and the curve shaper and trying to up the frequency on it and doing all this different stuff, they're burning just as much power. So if the power is about the same, then all you really have is like the 5% improvement that you get when you enable all that stuff. Now, if you can have some self-discipline and not do all that, which personally I don't, I can't leave it just factory. I can't do it. You know, I think if you stay in that efficiency point, they probably are a little bit better. I don't have the time or resources to really get in there and just make all the data points, but my take would be, you know, running at factory, the performance is probably dead even for, you know, a tiny bit less power. But then since you're like, well, it's a new gen, I want better performance, you enable all the bells and whistles, and then it eats up just as much power and it only nets you like 5%, which isn't great. So that's where we're at for the first three. Those are the kind of less exciting. What I've really been digging into and kind of where I want to share my initial findings and get something out, since it's been a little bit for me, is the overclocking and the RAM compatibility and what you can do. So between the two processors, the 9600 and the 9950X, very, very different scenarios, obviously, because you got the bottom of the bucket and then you got the top of the bucket right now. For overclocking, the settings and everything's pretty much the same on the 9000 as the 7000. You can enable PBO on the frequency. You can up the ceiling by 200, which once again, you're not actually raising the frequency. PBO is kind of doing all of its internal calculations based on, you know, temperature, voltage, all that stuff to you get what you get, but you can increase the ceiling by 200 as a maximum. And then you still have the curve optimizer, which I'm a huge fan of, but now you have the curve shaper. And there's a couple of key differences between the high performance CPU and the low performance. So on the 9600X, you can just set the frequency ceiling plus 200 and you can just curve optimizer, all core, -30, -35. I was able to, I don't think I won the silicone lottery. You know, I spend quite a bit of time online. I've seen other people being able to do it too. You just set all core, -30, -35 or whatever. And it's going to clock in right at, you know, the 5.6 gigahertz. And with the with the undervolt at that like 30 to 35 range, especially during gaming, it's just going to leave the frequency pegged there. So I think I even have, I said I wasn't going to go through a bunch of videos. I do have some footage though. So I have the 9600X set up with my 4090. Oh geez, my KVM's taking a shit. All right, there we go. All right, let's see here. 9600. No, this is not what I want. Stand by here for me. All right, OC video. All right, here we go. All right, so this is Cyberpunk. And this should be, let's see here. This is 1440p. First of all, 1440p ultra settings, I'm pretty sure ray tracing is off. 9600X kind of holding its own. That's putting the 4090 to work. I mean, yeah, it is bottlenecking a little bit here. We'd like to see this absolutely pegged out, but it is what it is. But the big thing is, I'm going to draw your attention down here on the left. You can see I got the plus 200 ceiling on there, and then I got undervolt going. And it's just sticking all core right at a little over 5.6. 5630 on the megahertz. But then you can see our energy efficiency here. We're pulling 100 watts. So, yeah, it's awesome that we're able to overclock it. But, you know, then your energy efficiency goes right out the window. But this is really respectable because you're looking at a 6-core processor, which is perfect for gaming. And you're looking at it pulling down, you know, 5.6 gigahertz OC That's awesome. It is an improvement. The disappointing thing is when it comes to just real life performance, it doesn't translate to much, right? Because AMD, a little bit more frequency is great, but it doesn't respond like super well. That's why the 7500F is such a good value, because even though it's like clocked slightly slower, it's like barely slower in practice. So it's cool, big number better. I love the overclocking aspect. It's cool to get a 6 core running 5.6 just all the time. And 100 watts is like really not bad. That's not bad at all. The thing is, it's just not a whole lot better than the previous generation. So that's the 9600. You don't even got to mess around with Shaper. Uh, you just set the curve optimizer and away you go. It's going to peg those frequencies all day long as you keep it cool. And that's all she wrote. The 9950X, this is where the curve shaper is awesome, because it's obviously just a much more complicated CPU. It's got 16 core, 32 threads. It generates a ton of heat comparatively, pulls a lot of power. Right off the rip, I was like, well, let's just see if I get lucky. I'll just go curve optimizer, all core minus 30. No shot. The thing was freezing up left and right. I dialed it down, dialed it down, dialed it down. Maybe I just lost the silicon lottery, but like the best I could get all core was like negative 15. And then it's just not enough of an undervolt to really take advantage of that 200 megahertz ceiling that you're trying to get to, right? Because we raised the ceiling on what it can do, so I want to actually see it do it, so I actually get the performance. The all core was just not going to work. So in the past, what you would have to do is you'd have to do it per core, and you would have to go test every single core individually and be like, okay, how good is this core? Can I maybe sneak in a couple extra, bits, millivolts of undervolt on it? And most of the time through testing, it was cool because you felt like you did the work and you squeezed the absolute most out of it, but like it usually wasn't in reality like a huge win. So what I did next is I dove into the curve shaper. And this is, I did it on MSI board. I don't have any footage for it, so I'm just gonna have to walk you through it. But if you've done any amount of research, basically it breaks it up into zones. So you have like low frequency, low temperature, low frequency, medium temperature, low frequency, high temperature, and it goes through the entire thing to build out this big matrix of like all the potential scenarios that you could have. And then from there, I was able to really dial it in. And it turned out the processor actually was pretty good, because I was able to basically fill in a majority of the matrix with the negative 30, which I wanted. And then when you go into the high frequency, I think I dialed it down to like high frequency, high temp to about negative 25, and then max frequency, max temp down to negative 20. So that's a bunch of words and stuff, and I should probably just go plug that computer in so I can get the footage off the BIOS and really show it to you. Right now, it's not a graphical type thing. I've heard a bunch of the manufacturers are working on getting like an actual graphical matrix or diagram in there so you can really tune it. Right now, it's just a bunch of lines you have to fill out. But basically, what that allowed me to do is set the amount of undervolt per the frequency and temperature rather than just per core, and that worked extremely well. I've been able to basically get it to run, because there's two CCDs, you got 8 cores on each. One core is a little stronger than the other. So on the strong CCD, I was able to get it to run 5.8 gigahertz pretty much full time while gaming, which was awesome. But the big key to that is keeping it cool, because the second it reaches its temp trigger, it's going to go into that max frequency, high temp, and then it's going to reduce your undervolt because it's going to need more voltage to deal with the higher temperatures because of science or something. So the key then is to keep it cool. I'm running mine with just a 360 millimeter all-in-one. I think I got a Corsair whatever on that one, which you don't need to spend that much money. You can get plenty of affordable AIOs that will do just as good, and it is what it is. That's just what I had laying around. So I guess my takeaway here is, when we talk about the curve shaper versus curve optimizer and new technology, the curve shaper is a huge win on the high-end CPUs. On the low-end CPUs, just set your curve optimizer and be done. It's going to peg the frequency because it's easy to cool and it pulls hardly any power, and you're going to be good to go. So that's kind of where I'm at with the overclocking. Is the PBO improvements for the high-end processors are awesome in my book. I was able to achieve a lot more with a lot less work. It was so much easier to just set conditions-based undervolting versus experimenting and running in and testing each individual core and trying to find the sweet spot. So huge win, big time saver, and probably honestly a performance booster comparatively, even if you did the work before. So curve shaper, awesome on the high-end CPUs. And then I want to come down here to the RAM compatibility. So I had really high hopes when I got my 9600, and there's a couple different things I'll talk about. So what we really have to get into with understanding AMD memory performance is your Fclk Uclk Memclk. So Fclk's your Infinity Fabric, your Uclk's your memory controller, and then the Memclk is like actually what your memory is running at. So, back in Zen 3 days, AM4, whatever, you wanted a 1-to-1 ratio. Then in AM5, they were like, we've desynced it, so now the sweet spot's 2-to-3 ratio. And now they've even improved their memory controller. So basically with Zen 4, your Infinity Fabric would be at 2000. So we'll go Infinity Uclk Memclk. So Zen 4, you basically get 2000. Your Uclk would be 3000. Your Memclk would be 3000. And you'd run ddr5-8000 basically. Because that's the mega transfers. So what you're actually getting is 3000 megahertz because double data rate, so you do it in half. And this is your 2-to-3 ratio. So this is your 2-to-3 ratio. So I'll start with the 9600 first. So Zen 5, the 9600X. That's not what I wanted. Whatever, it says right here, 2-to-3, 2-to-3. All right, cool. So the 9600 Infinity Clock, right off the rip, I was able to run at 2200. And for the Zen 4, like the 7000 series, people were able to run higher than 2000, but it was like almost impossible to run 22. I'm 2 for 2 CPUs. The 9600 and the 9950X both set it right to 22, no problem. So in Zen 4, you could up it a little bit, and that's how people would maybe be like, oh, I'm going to run a 62 or 64 kit. But that was pretty much where it's at. So I will say on the 9000 series, the Infinity Fabric is improved. I'm 2 for 2, just setting it to 2200. Boom, it's good to go. So if we work this backwards, on single CCD processors, we always want the Uclk, I'll just say U, whatever, equals mem. So like you want the controller to be running at the same speed. So 3000, 3000. And then you want to do the 2-to-3 is kind of what they determined was the sweet spot. So just trying to take, that into account, I was like, I want to run the same thing. So if I got 2200 on the Infinity Fabric divided by 0.66, because we're 2/3, that means that I would want my Memclk at 333, which would basically put your mega transfers, just put it at DDR, that's not a thing, so we'll just say 6600. I was hoping that they somehow worked some magic and the memory controller would do it. It will not do it. And so if Uclok can't be that, then it's going to be Uclok equals mem, I can't type, divided by 2. This, on a single CCD processor, so anything 8 cores or less, we don't want that. We want this. So we can do some backwards math. Well, no, we can't do any backwards math. It took a bunch of trying around. So the memory controller, I could basically get up to 3200 because I would lock the Uclok equals Memclok. And what I could do is I could get this working backwards. I basically figured out I could get this to 6400, which puts this to 3200. And if I know I locked Memclok to Uclok, that means I know my Uclok's 3200. So then you're like, okay, well, this isn't the perfect 3-to-2 ratio. It's close enough, and it ran well. So this is ultimately how I'm running my 9600. And the 6400, you're like, oh, like, did you buy like all these kits to figure it out or whatever? No, it was all just the G-Skill brand of memory, but they're all using the Hynix dies, and I just went in there and overclocked it. I just went in there and set to 6400, adjusted the friggin' latencies and everything on it. And so far, this has been running great. So there was rumors and I guess mixed information and different things like that. AMD had mentioned at one point, like, we think 64 is going to be the new standard. And then I saw people come out and they're like, the architecture hasn't changed, like nothing has changed. It's not going to be any different. My first takeaway is at least the quality or something has changed, because 2200 on the Infinity clock was like almost impossible on the old ones. It seems easy to run. I haven't really tried to push it much beyond that. And then the memory controller seems I'm 2 for 2 on both of these, having no problem running 3200. And that gets your new DDR up to 64. ddr5-8400. So this is for this information right here. So then the next one's the 9950X. I'll be honest with you, that's one of my other goals. I've just been behind the ball on testing and making videos. One of my other things was I wanted to see if I could take advantage of the 8000 megahertz memory. Because on dual CCDs, you have two different groupings of cores that then use the Infinity Fabric. You can look up the diagram. It works. Faster memory works and can be an advantage on the dual CCDs. So then what do? I immediately set this up at 2200. But now we're dual CCD, so there's no way the memory controller is going to run at 4000. There's just no shot, zero shot. So what I did is I came down here to 8000, and then we got the Memclok divided by 2. So, and I'm sorry, I wrote these wrong just to keep this all the same. So the 8000 kit is 4000 megahertz is actually what that is, and then Uclok divided by Memclok, or sorry, Uclok equals Memclok divided by 2. So what am I doing here? Whatever. My chart doesn't matter. I think you get what I'm saying, hopefully. So the Memclok is 2000 because divided by 2. And then this would set this to 2000. And you're like, well, how is that going to be good? That looks terrible. With the dual CCD, basically it opens up the availability, so like each grouping of cores can kind of have access, and with the faster speed there, it's basically able to feed both of them a little bit quicker. So that's the theory, at least. The main thing that I wanted to test is just, can this thing run 8000 on the Expo profile? And the answer was resoundingly yes. I slapped in a 2x24 gig kit of the Team Group Extreme. It had like just come out right when this processor came out, and I was like, you know what, let's do it. So I slapped in the Team Group Extreme 2x24 gig kit of ddr5-8000. Immediately launched, set infinity clock to 2200, Uclok to Memclok divided by 2, and the expo, and the computer booted right up. So I'm going to go back and do some performance calculations, and then further questions like, well, why aren't you making them all match up? The initial thing I did test is I tested the Infinity Fabric 2000 versus 2200. The Infinity Fabric is basically how all the information is flowing like inside of the CPU. It does help to get some additional frequency there. So it was better off at 2200 in my initial testing. So I need to go back, and I tried to just downclock the Extreme kit to 6000 to get some initial swags on like, hey, is it actually better or not? And it didn't want to boot with my initial settings downclocking. So probably because that is such a swing, I'm just gonna throw one of my 6000 kits in there because I got a couple sitting around here. But I am gonna do some testing to be like, in gaming specifically, and maybe a couple other workloads, is it beneficial to run 8000 megahertz on the dual CCD CPUs? Because people started exploring this a little bit with one of the BIOS updates on the 7000 series, but it never really took off. So I'm kind of curious with some of the improvements and things, even though they're minor on the 9000, if like maybe this does help a little bit. Probably not, because like nothing's been all that impressive, but maybe it's fun to try out. So that's kind of what I'm doing there. I need to get some more testing done, but it definitely boots and runs pretty well. I mean, I've been gaming on it, running 8000 megahertz just on the expo kit. And it's been doing a good job. I haven't tested it with my 4090 yet. I got it in other computers, got 4080 Super on it, but this is kind of, you know, the standard Zen 4 setup. This is what I ended up coming to terms with on my 9600X, and this is what I ended up coming to terms with on my 9950, and I'm going to continue to test that. So I guess my main takeaway is the 9000 is increasing your capability on memory speeds a little bit. Specifically, you can get the Infinity Fabric a little faster. You can maintain the same ratios, basically relatively close, and 6400 should be the new standard probably on the single CCDs. The 9950, it's definitely awesome and capable. It runs 8000 no problem, but I'll need to see if it's actual performance improvement or not, and that's something I'll be working on in the future. So that is a little bit exciting, but this says pricing versus value is what I want to talk about next, but this is kind of, before I get into the pricing, I guess this does play into value. If you're somebody like me and you're just really passionate about this stuff, and you like playing around with it, and you like building it, and you like testing it, it's exciting to have new products, right? Because you're like, where's the line? Where's the line? It's like, oh, I squeaked out another, 200 megahertz on the Infinity Fabric. Dude, your average consumer doesn't know that the Infinity Fabric exists. So like, this is not a selling point. It's not exciting for most people. You got to be a little bit out of your head to really love this stuff. So my main takeaway is like pricing and value. If you're not me, who's just this psychopath sitting here playing around with RAM combinations and resetting the BIOS and locking the computer up 37 times a night and having to freaking jump the BIOS jumper or the CMOS jumper to get it to reset, and then start all over, and then tweak. If you're not that person, the thing is on AMD, like a couple extra megahertz on the memory and all this stuff, it doesn't translate into real performance. You might see like a little bit of uptick, like, ooh, I got half a frame rate more, but that doesn't sell products. The price to performance does, and that's the biggest problem. But there's a few really interesting things that this generation has done. So the bottom line is, it should be pretty obvious. The 7600 at 182, we got all the pricing. Anything with 8000, just ignore it. It's not even worth your time. if you're talking about gaming, you're gonna have a dedicated GPU, and you want either a 7000 or a 9000. So 7600 at 182. The additional curve shaper, like we said, on the low end doesn't matter. So the benefit of that is nil. So you're going to be able to curve optimize this one just like the 96, and you're probably going to get very similar results. And you're going to be, within a couple gigahertz, and the performance, is like 3 to 5% difference. At 182, the 9600, 279. So you're going to save basically $100 by going with the older unit. None of that's new news. We already knew all that. But what I think is extremely interesting is this generation has completely upset the 7800X3D. Because the 7800X3D was like the king of value. It was the fastest gaming CPU, and it was cheap. Like, you could find them on sale for $350. So my recommendation would be to either buy a 7600 for an entry-level system, and then once you get to where you're like tripping the trigger, maybe around like a 4070 Ti, or maybe around like a 7900 GRE, probably more like a 7900 XT, you're kind of tripping the trigger where it's like, all right, maybe it's worth it. Let's look into the 7800X3D. And I would almost never recommend a 7700 processor, because it's an 8-core, but it was usually like 40 to 50 bucks cheaper than the 7800X3D. And it was like, listen, either your CPU is not going to matter because you don't have enough GPU, and just get the cheapest one and put more money into your GPU, which you can go look up my other videos that talk about that. The value pays off for your average gamer that just plays the new releases that comes out. You're always better with more GPU. So it's like, hey, listen, either get the 7600X or get the 7800X3D once you trip the trigger and you got a serious enough rig that you need it. Since the 9000 series came out, and everyone was like, oh no, it didn't beat the 7800X3D, the market was just like, the 7800X3D is still the #1 guy in town, and the price has gone crazy. I mean, this can't be right now, but here, let me blow this up. 7800X3D 539. Let me click on this because this like can't be right. Oh, they're just out of stock. Yeah, I mean, people are just buying them. Like, I don't know if it's like fear mongering, like, oh no, it's like they're gonna stop making them and they're gonna run out or something. But like, look at this. This processor hasn't been out of stock since like it was released, and the price has been low. As low as Newegg had it for $339. Right now, the cheapest thing in stock, I guess Best Buy has it for $419. But still, this goes back to my point where now come and look at the 7700X, $249. It's like $180 cheaper. So now all of a sudden this CPU, I'll be honest with you, I've never owned a 7700 or 7700X because to me, they never made any sense. It was like either get the 7600 or shoot, even get the 7500F, or jump right to like the second your GPU hits that line where it's like, I'm getting a pretty serious GPU, usually around that like $800 to $1,000, GPU level. Then I'm like, all right, now we're getting freaking serious. Like, we need that 7800X3D, and it's the next step that makes sense. The 7700 is barely cheaper, and you don't get the 3D cache. So like, forget that thing. At $249, at $180 cheaper, now this CPU is making a ton of sense. And then when you pile on top of, I haven't purchased the 9700X because honestly, both these processors have just been not that crazy. Like the 9600, I got the 9600 to test the low end. I got the 9950 to test the high end, and I wanted to find the upper and lower limits of some of this other stuff we've been talking about. But I'm not gonna waste my personal money because I just buy all this stuff. I'm not gonna waste my personal money to buy like every CPU in a generation of just like uninteresting generation. However, like I might go back. And on future builds that I do for fun, I might start investing in the 7700 because it's making way more sense. Because if you're like, yeah, you know what, I just don't want a 6-core, I really want an 8-core just because, or if you're like, I think I got something that might bottleneck the 7600, but if I buy the 7800X 3D, I'm not going to have the budget for what I want. That's probably going to bottleneck it or something along those lines. This is starting to look like a great deal, especially when you look at performance to performance. The 9700 barely beat it, and it's, you know, almost $100 more expensive. Uh, so I guess pricing to value, there's no new news there. Like the 7000 series is still king because they're like half the price at 97% of the performance. But what I think is more interesting is what the 99,000 series has done to upset the pricing in the older generation. And namely, I think people are just like fear buying the 7800X 3D because they're like, oh no, they might not make it anymore. It might sell out. You can still buy a brand new like Ryzen 3600, I'm pretty sure. So I wouldn't be too worried about that right now. They're going to keep making them for a while. But I think that's what it is. It's weird market economics that have just totally blown up the 7800X 3D and has, to me, made like other players enter the field for, you know, what's interesting. Uh, but that's kind of where it's at. Pricing to value, nothing too new there besides for just kind of what it's done in the market. And then the final thing I'll touch on is AMD versus Intel. This is kind of where I'm at. If you're buying a new gaming computer right now, there's like no question in my mind. I would just buy a Ryzen 7000. I wouldn't buy an Intel. And I always say this, and maybe somebody will say different. I'm really not biased. I would argue that a majority of the computers I've owned throughout the years have all been Intel. My first computer was Intel. The first one I ever built was Intel. Uh, the computer I've kept the longest was the 8700K. Like, God, I love that computer. I love it so much. I just built, I sold it and I regretted it every moment of my life. I built another one just for fun. I have an 8700K sitting over there in the corner. Because I love it. I don't know why. I just love it. But regardless, if I was building a rig right now or buying one, I would buy an AMD 7000. Because Intel, and this blows my mind when I hear people buying Intel right now. And I'm not even trying to really hate, but it's like you have a company that admitted that they have a faulty product that they're researching how to fix actively post them all being out in the wild and it coming forth that they're all just eating themselves. And I know it's like, oh, well, mine didn't eat itself. No, it's been proven. Like it's just a matter of time. So if it hasn't eaten itself, some amount of degradation has happened. And then you're like, well, they got the microcode out. It took, you know, a year to figure out that these things were eating, over a year. It took probably like 2 years to figure out that these things were eating themselves. So I would argue that we're not going to know that they're not eating themselves for another year or two after this microcode comes out. Well, this is an end of life product. The LGA 1700 socket is done. It's already seen 3 generations, or I'll call it like 2.1 generations. So you're not going to find out, if, in my opinion, if the microcode worked until that like CPU is just no longer relevant. So it's like, why would I buy a product now to wait and see if it's fixed so that by the time I know that it's fixed, the socket's out of date and I can't even buy a new generation if I want to. So that's not to hate on Intel. I really want Intel to do well. I like competition. I like a lot of their products. To me, AMD is really easy to get into and really easy to kind of do some of the light overclocking and feel like you got a custom setup and have a good time. Intel to me is like really for the like very advanced user. Like you can really get in there and tweak some stuff. Uh, but they're both enjoyable. I enjoy them both. I have fun overclocking them both. I have fun gaming on them both. I'm recording on a 12900K, and this computer that you see right here is that 9600X. So I do both, but I just would not buy Intel right now. I hope the Core Ultra whatevers, I hope they're freaking amazing. I'll probably go and buy one to find out, but when they come out, but just in this meantime, I would just either wait for the Core Ultras to come out and because you're like diehard Intel and just be patient, or I would just buy a Ryzen 7000 right now and then hopefully, you know, the 9800X3D rocks, or just, you know, keep what you got for the final, you know, end of life CPU there, and buy, you know, the last generation of Ryzen CPU that goes on the AM5, so that you can really make that thing last, you know, 5-6 years, whatever. But that's kind of my opinion on the AMD versus Intel. I could not mentally justify right now building like a 14900K or something, uh, because, like I said, you're not gonna know if it's rock solid until after it's irrelevant. So I would just, yeah, that's where I'm at. People might disagree. If you disagree, you can leave a comment telling me about how awesome your 14900K is, and I'll respect it. I rock a 12900K, honestly, on accident, but then I was kind of laughing that I never upgraded it because I was like, yeah, dude, that 12900 still slaps, and it ain't eating itself, and I got that thing overclocked, so win, 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 win. I know it's not as fast, but the thing still scoots. Scoots so good that, let's talk about that real quick. Um, if you do want to build an Intel, building a budget Intel has never been better. The 12th gen, you don't got to worry about degradation. Dude, 129, this processor is insanely good for gaming. Like, if you're trying to game on a budget, 130 bucks for a 12600K, oh my god. If you want like a multimedia freaking type deal, the sales ended. Like 2 days ago, 12900 was going for like 249. That's still a 16 core CPU for like 249. That's unreal. Unreal. Maybe you don't want the i5 because you're like i5s for you know, noobs or whatever. 12.7 for 225. Like these are great processors. They're not like the bleeding edge. But you can put some gaming Intel setups together and not have to, or some like budget Intel setups together. I probably, realistically, the most interesting one to me is the 12600, because if you're like, I like Intel, you don't got to worry about degradation. That's insanely cheap, and you can put together a great little rig. I've built so many 12600s. They've never disappointed me. Absolutely awesome processor, and that's a freaking killer price. But once again, it's going to be end of life. You know, the socket's done, so there's that. Which is why lots of times these days I lean towards, for 130 bucks I can pick up an AM5 7500F, and I still think that's really, like, I would say that like 75% of users would be, their goals would be met with a 7500F. Like, your average Joe doesn't rock a 4090. He doesn't rock a 4080. He rocks a 4060. If he's lucky, probably a 3060. And 7500F will do everything you need to do. It's like 130 bucks. You can get into Zen 5. And I do that for people a lot. I help people out. They'll be like, what should I do? I build them or help them build those computers, and they're always happy. So I went a little longer than I thought on this one. I haven't made a video in a while, so I guess I had some things to get off my chest, but that's kind of where I've been at. I'm in no way disappointed. All my 9000, both my 9000 CPUs run great, and like, if you did buy one and build with it, you're not going to be disappointed. That they're perfectly fine, but just the price to value is not there, and it's not surprising. And I think I said in my last video, like, you know, in a year when the 7000s are all gone and this thing's out of its honeymoon phase and the prices drop through the floor like all AMD products do, it'll just be like, cool, it's a slightly updated version that has a little bit better RAM capability and a couple faster megahertz clock speed. And I guarantee you the 9600 is going to be like 200 bucks, and like, I don't know. I guess it depends on when the 7600 sells out, but it is going to come down. And then the scary thing about that to me is, like, we're just not seeing enough gain. So, like, what is this going to be like in 2 years, and we're going to have the exact same performance we had 2 years ago from today? Like, that would be super boring. Like, the same performance for like 4 years in the entry level, that'd be terrible. But we'll just have to see how it goes. If you enjoyed the content, give me a like. This was kind of a wordy one. I'm going to get more testing done. I'll have some more videos where you can actually see the performance in action, but that'll be at a future date. Good luck building whatever you decide, and have a good one.